All right, so one of the things that we just finished up in the past couple of days, as you can see, we got the chassis here. We sprayed that about a week or so ago. As you can see, it looks really good with that gloss black on it. We finally got the rear end put back together. We still got to put the rear shocks in, but this whole assembly here, and I was hoping to get a video so that you could actually see it, but I think I can explain it so it makes sense. How all this goes together, especially with these are the rear stub axles, and it's basically this is where the CV joint bolts up. You got your shaft that comes out here, and then you'll have your transmission down here. So this piece right here has an axle that goes all the way through, and as you can see right there, bolts up. And what you've got, it took us a little bit trying to figure out, okay, how does this thing go back together? And believe it or not, we purchased a Haynes book, and we've looked online, and everything that we look at isn't always 100% clear on the way it goes back. And so again, this is a 72 Super Beetle, and the 72 is a little bit different because, as you can see, we have this IRS, independent rear suspension. You can see the arm here, that red right there, that's a new bushing that goes in there with an Allen bolt that goes through. That thing's massive. I think that's a 17 millimeter bolt, Dad? That big guy? Yeah. And then you can see how it bolts up here to, this is a torsion bar on both sides, and that's a totally different story. But anyways, the progression for putting this back, after we kind of got our brain wrapped around it, it's actually fairly easy, but you do need to understand a couple of things. One, on the inside, you're probably going to have to replace your wheel bearings. And there's two kinds of bearings that I'm going to show you here, if I can get them together. You've got ball bearings and you've got roller bearings. So as you can see here, we've got roller bearings there, and you've got roller bearings and you've got ball bearings. And then you've got some seals, as you can see here, and there's a few other things that go in there. So starting from the end back here and working our way towards the outer portion of the wheel, you've got your stub axle, and then you've got a spacer that goes down onto that stub axle, and it comes and it butts all the way up in here. And that spacer is kind of concave, and it needs to be facing that direction. You'll see how it faces there. And then you've got a seal like this. This seal, and actually there are two different seals. And when we first started working on it, we thought, oh, they're all the same. Actually, they're not, and I don't know if you can tell on this one. It's kind of got, an inward angle there, and that's because it has to rest against the angle on this stub axle. So there's a spacer that's on the inside of that. There's the stub axle goes through, so that's resting there. So you've got, when you're putting all this back together, the first thing that you have to put in is your ball bearing. Your ball bearing, as you can see here, is actually sitting about right up in there. And so you've got your ball bearing, and then there's a C-clip, retaining clip, that there's a groove on the inside of this housing here, and you put that C-clip in. So first you got your ball bearing you go in, then you got your C-clip, and then you've got this this little seal right here that'll go on. And in order to get it back in, you have to grease it up, you have to stick it in, and we used a very large, really big socket to hammer that thing back in. And you kind of have to do it in a circular motion, so that way it all gets in the whole way. And then the retaining clip was fairly easy to get put back in. The thing that you'll notice is that the retaining clip is thicker on one side than it is on the other. So when you get it in, it almost looks like it's not sitting down in the groove, but it actually is. Then you've got your seal, you know, and really grease it up, and you can hit that in. We hit that in at first with putting a piece of wood up against it to get it flush, and then used the socket to kind of get that up in there as far as it would go. Then you can stick the stub axle through, and it'll stick out to the other side. After that, you've got a 2-inch spacer that you'll grease up and you'll slide onto the shaft. And then on the outside of that, you have your roller bearing. And the ones that we had, actually, as you can see, this has like a piece of something there, but it doesn't have it on this side. The new one that we had has it on both sides. And so we stuck that, you stick that on there, and then you have a washer that goes on, and then a small O-ring that goes on, and then you've got another spacer like you started off with, and it has an angle on one side, and that angle needs to face the outside, towards the outside of the vehicle, the outside of the hub, because on the inside is a real, it's hard to see, a real tiny angle that goes over that O-ring. And then after you do that, you've got, you put your backing plate right here. As you can see, that's the backing plate. That slides on, and then you've got a plate cover. That plate cover also has a seal like this, but instead of having that angle, it's actually completely flat. So you'll just have to notice that it's completely flat. You push that into the front side of that you know, plate, and then that all slides onto that shaft, and you bolt it up with 4, I think they were 14mm bolts. And you do have a paper gasket, as you can see here. This one kind of tore a little bit. That goes on in between that cover and your backing plate. And you can just put a little bit of grease on that to hold it in place, stick it in there, bolt it up, and then tighten it down. And then you're ready to put on your brake drum. And that slid on pretty easy. And then we got the wheels put on just to kind of get it on the ground. So if you're working with this, it can kind of seem a little ominous at first. Coming out with it wasn't that bad. The one thing that we didn't realize was that there was that retaining clip right here. So when we were trying to get that bearing out, it just was not coming out. And then we realized, oh, there's a clip there. And so, but once you pull that clip out, the bearing, you know, you can kind of knock that thing out. So hopefully that'll save some of you guys a headache as you're putting this stuff back together.